The Garden Below. Chapter 1. What the Ground Keeps. The town clerk's office smelled of old paper and radiator heat, which was the same thing it had smelled of every time Nora had been inside it, which was more times than she could count in her first year on the job. She set the incident report on the counter and waited. Sandra Okafor appeared from the back room with the particular efficiency of someone who had worked in the same building for a very long time and had learned exactly how many steps it took to get anywhere. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of calm that comes from having answered the same categories of questions for many years. Officer Callahan. Sandra took the report without looking at it. The Brennan property line dispute. Same one, Nora said. Sandra made a small sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite acknowledgement, and set the report in a tray. She would file it correctly. She always filed things correctly. That was what everyone in town said about Sandra Okafor. You could ask her for any document going back 20 years, and she would have it in her hands before you finished the sentence. Nora was about to leave when her eye caught the photograph on the wall beside the filing cabinets. Two people at a campsite, both in rain gear, both grinning at the camera. Sandra and a man Nora assumed was her husband. Behind them, a green tent. Guy lines running out to low stakes in the ground. The knots on the lines were neat and deliberate, tied with the kind of habit that meant the person tying them did not have to think about it anymore. Nora looked at it for a second longer than she meant to. Acadia, Sandra said, following her glance. 4 years ago, before my husband's knee gave out. Looks cold, Nora said. It was May. It is always cold in May. Sandra smiled briefly and turned back to her desk. Nora walked out into the thin March light. The harbor was still half quiet at this hour, the fishing boats returning in ones and twos after the long winter. The water was gray and flat, and the gulls were making their usual commentary about nothing in particular. She had grown up with that sound. It still settled something in her when she heard it. Her radio crackled. Cole's voice came through level and unhurried, which was how his voice always came through, which meant either nothing was wrong or something was quite wrong and he was deciding how to say it. Callahan, where are you? Harbor Street. Just left the clerk's office. Head out to the Ashby place on Tanner Road. The excavation crew found something. She waited for more. It did not come immediately. What kind of something? She asked. Cole paused for exactly one beat. The county is sending a forensic liaison. You're there to assist. It was the way he said assist that told her. She got in her car and drove east. The Ashby place sat at the end of a gravel drive behind a line of white pine that had grown up wild for years without anyone cutting them back. The farmhouse itself was 1940s construction, solid but tired, and the grounds showed 6 years of no attention in the way that grounds do when there is no one to care about them. A yellow excavator sat idle beside the south wall of the house. The operator was standing well back from the machine, drinking coffee from a thermos with the careful casualness of someone who needs something to do with his hands. The county forensic liaison was a trim man in his 50s named Reyes, who shook Nora's hand with the minimal pressure of someone who considers handshaking a procedural formality. He looked at her uniform and her age and arrived at a conclusion that was visible in the way he turned back to the scene without waiting for her to follow. She followed anyway. The raised garden bed ran along the south face of the house for perhaps 8 meters. It had been bordered with old railway timber, the kind of heavy pressure-treated wood that looks like it will be there forever when it is first installed. 2 sections of the timber border lay to one side, where the excavator bucket had lifted and set them. The 3rd section was still in position. Below the lifted sections, the soil was dark and disturbed. The forensic team had cordoned the area, and 2 of them were working slowly with hand tools. Nora stood where she could see without being in the way. One of the technicians lifted a piece of material with gloved hands and set it carefully in an open evidence bag. It was the edge of a heavy canvas tarp, dark with age and soil, deteriorated to the point where it was more suggestion than substance in places, along what remained of the hem. Nora could see a row of brass eyelets. One of them had been repaired at some point. A loop of nylon cord threaded through the eyelet and knotted back on itself, replacing a fastener that must have broken. The knot was small and precise. She looked at it for a moment without being able to place why it seemed familiar. And then Reyes said something to one of his technicians, and the bag was sealed, and the moment passed. "We'll have preliminary findings to Cole by end of week," Reyes said, appearing beside her. "Your role here is documentation support. If you can handle the site log, that keeps my people free for the recovery work." "Of course," Nora said. She took out her notebook. She wrote down the date and the time and the address and the weather, which was overcast with a flat northern light, and a temperature that had not climbed above 4 degrees since morning. She wrote down the name of the excavation contractor and the name of the operator and the dimensions of the raised garden bed as she paced them out. She wrote 1 canvas tarp, partial, brass eyelets, cord repair, 1 eyelet, specific knot, nylon. Then she looked at what she had written and could not have said exactly why she had written that last part. She kept it anyway. By the time she got back to Ed's house that evening, the light was already gone. She knocked twice and let herself in with her key, which she had been doing since she was 7 years old, and saw no reason to stop. Ed was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the newspaper folded open to the crossword, which he did in pen and never got wrong, which Nora had decided years ago was either proof of something or an extremely refined form of showing off. Biscuit lifted his head from the floor beside the wood stove, confirmed it was Nora, and set his head back down. "Sit," Ed said. Without looking up, she sat. She did not say anything for a moment. The kitchen was warm and smelled of whatever he had made for supper and the faint cedar of the wood stove, and she let the day settle before she tried to put any of it into words. "They found a body," she said, "out at the old Ashby place, under the garden." Ed placed his pen on the table. "Old or new?" he asked. "Old, buried. The new owners were clearing it out." She wrapped her hands around the mug he had set in front of her without her noticing him do it. "County forensic team. I was there for documentation." Ed looked at her for a moment with a particular attention he gave to things that interested him, which looked from the outside like no attention at all, but which she had learned over a lifetime to distinguish. "March," he said. "What?" "The ground is soft in March." He picked up his pen. It would not have been hard work. She thought about the raised garden bed, the railway timber border, the dark soil underneath. She thought about how permanent the bed must have looked for 6 years with no one touching it. She thought about the kind of person who looks at a garden bed and sees something other than a garden bed. She finished her tea. On the drive home, she thought about the photograph in Sandra Okafor's office, the tent in the rain, the neat knots on the guy lines, tied by hands that had done it so many times they no longer had to think about it. She did not know why she was still thinking about it. She filed it away and drove home through the dark. Chapter 2. What Reyes did not write down. The forensic team was back at the Ashby place by 7:30 the following morning. Nora arrived at 7:25. Reyes was already there. He gave her the same minimal nod as the day before and returned to his work. She picked up the site log and continued where she had left off. The recovery was careful and slow. The skeleton was complete, which Reyes noted aloud to his team with the tone of someone checking an item off a list. The tarp had preserved more than might be expected, given the 5 years of soil contact. Nora did not say anything about the 5 years, because no one had confirmed 5 years yet. That was her own arithmetic, based on nothing official. She watched and wrote things down. Around 9 o'clock, one of the technicians photographed the tarp remnants in full before bagging them in sections. Nora positioned herself where she could see the work without obstructing it. The hem section came up last. The brass eyelets caught the flat morning light. The repaired one was near the corner. The nylon cord looped through and knotted back with the same precision she had noticed the day before. Seeing it again, she had the same feeling of almost recognition, the way a word sits on the edge of memory without quite arriving. She wrote it in the log again. Cord repair, corner eyelet, nylon, specific knot construction. She added, not a standard overhand, not a figure 8, something with a secondary loop. She did not know the name of it. She knew she had seen something like it somewhere. Reyes came to stand beside her while the technician sealed the bag. Anything in the soil profile worth noting? Nora asked. Reyes looked at her the way he had looked at her twice already, which was the look of a man recalibrating the question against his prior estimate of the person asking it. There is an iron oxide deposit in the lower strata, he said, below where the remains were found. Narrow and short, consistent with a ferrous object in contact with the soil for an extended period. He paused. No ferrous object was recovered. Nora wrote that down. What shape? She asked. Cylindrical, approximately 2 centimeters diameter, 40 centimeters length. He looked at her again. Why? Property boundary survey stake, she said. Standard dimensions. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That is a reasonable inference, he said, in the tone of someone who has decided to revise an estimate upward by a small but meaningful amount. She walked the perimeter of the garden bed while the team worked. The railway timber border on the north side was intact, the wood black with age and still solid despite the rot that had taken the south sections. She paced the corners. The northeast corner of the property was visible from where she stood. Beyond the pine tree line, she could see the survey pin marker from here, a small orange flag on a wire stake. She looked at it for a moment. She would come back to that. Cole called at 10:40. Reyes filed a preliminary, he said. Blunt force, posterior skull, single strike. Medical examiner puts the burial at 4 to 6 years prior, based on decomposition rate and soil composition. That is consistent with the Leonard Pruitt disappearance. Nora said, silence on the line for 2 seconds. Reyes pulled the missing persons list himself, Cole said. Pruitt is on it. They have requested his dental records from the county file. He paused. You read the missing persons backlog. I read the file when I came on, Nora said. It was a habit. I went through everything in the archive drawer. Another pause. She could hear Cole deciding something. Come back to the station at noon, he said. I want you on the file documentation while the county runs the identification. I would rather stay on site through the recovery, she said. Cole sighed. It was his standard sigh, the one that meant he had already made the decision, and the sigh was the only objection he was going to register before moving forward. Noon, he said, and ended the call. She stayed until 11:50. At the station, she pulled the original Leonard Pruitt missing persons file from the archive. It was thin. Single man, 55, no close family in Harrow Cove, truck found at the Rockland ferry landing, working assumption, voluntary disappearance. The case had been administratively closed after 18 months with no new information. She read it twice. There were telephone records attached, a standard pull from the initial investigation. Local calls in the 2 weeks before his disappearance. She went through them line by line, which was not something the file indicated anyone had done in any particular detail, because there had been no murder investigation to make detail relevant. Nothing stood out. She set the file aside and went back to the site log. At 4:15, she drove out to the Ashby property again. The forensic team had gone. The site was cordoned with tape, and a single county vehicle sat at the end of the drive. She walked the perimeter. At the northeast corner of the property, she found what she expected to find. The survey pin marker was there, the small orange flag still upright. The wire stake was present, but the iron survey pin itself, the boundary marker that a 2018 county survey log would show as confirmed in place, was gone. The hole in the ground where it had been seeded was still visible if you knew to look for it. She crouched and looked at the hole for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked back to her car and drove to Ed's house. He was in the garden when she arrived, which was unusual for March, but Ed kept a cold-weather bed along the south fence that he tended year-round. He was turning soil with a short-handled spade and did not stop when she came through the gate. Biscuit was sitting on the back step watching him, with the philosophical patience of a dog who has learned the garden work takes exactly as long as it takes. "The stake is gone," she said. Ed turned another line of soil. "Which stake?" "The boundary survey pin at the northeast corner of the Ashby property. The 2018 survey log has it confirmed in place. It is not there now. There is an iron oxide deposit in the garden bed soil, cylindrical, approximately survey stake dimensions." Ed stopped digging. He looked at the turned earth for a moment. "Someone had to cross the property to reach that corner," he said. "Yes." "In March, before the ground froze again." "The burial was in March," she said. 4 to 6 years ago. Medical examiner's estimate." Ed set the spade against the fence and picked up his work gloves from the ground. "Come inside," he said. "I have lamb stew on." She followed him in. Biscuit took his spot by the wood stove without being asked. The kitchen was warm and smelled of rosemary and the slow richness of something that had been on the heat for several hours. Ed ladled stew into 2 bowls and set bread on the board and sat across from her. She ate. He ate. The wood stove clicked and settled. After a while, he said, "There are 2 kinds of knots." She looked up. "The kind you tie to hold something together," he said, "and the kind you tie because it is the only knot you know." He said nothing else after that. He finished his stew and refilled her bowl without asking. She thought about the tarp, the repaired eyelet, the small, precise loop of nylon cord, the hands that had tied it without having to think about it. She did not yet know what she was looking at, but she was looking at something. Chapter 3. 3 people with reasons. Cole called at 7 the next morning before Nora had finished her first coffee. "Dental records confirmed," he said. "The remains are Leonard Pruitt. County is reclassifying from missing person to homicide. We are the primary on local coordination. Reyes reports to us now." "All right," Nora said. "I want you on background. Pruitt's known associates, business contacts, anyone he had active dealings with in the 2 weeks before he disappeared. Pull it from the file and build it out." "His file is thin," she said. "Then make it less thin," Cole said, and ended the call. She drove to the station. The original file gave her a starting list of 7 names, 2 former tenants of properties Pruitt had managed, 1 business associate in Rockland, 1 attorney who had handled a contract dispute on his behalf, and 3 local contacts described in the investigating officer's notes as routine. She went through the list and pulled what she could from the town records database, which had the particular organizational logic of a system that had been added to by many different people over many years without anyone standardizing the categories. By 10 o'clock, she had a clearer picture of Leonard Pruitt than the file had offered. He had been a careful man. His records were organized and complete. He had managed 11 properties in and around Harrow Cove at the time of his disappearance, and his management agreements were all current and properly filed. He had filed 3 title searches in the 2 months before he went missing, which was a normal volume for a broker of his size. She pulled the 3 title searches. 2 were routine residential transfers. The third involved a parcel on the eastern edge of town that had been in dispute between 2 heirs. She checked the parcel number against the county map. It was not the Ashby property. She sat with that for a moment, then set it aside. At 10:30, she drove to the town clerk's office. The morning counter was quiet. Sandra Okafor was at her desk in the back room, visible through the open door. She came to the counter when Nora knocked on the frame. "Officer Callahan?" The reading glasses came off the chain and onto her face. "What can I help you with?" "I need to pull property transfer records for 11 parcels," Nora said. "Anything filed by Leonard Pruitt in the last 2 years of his active period. Is that something you can run from the database?" Sandra's expression did not change in any particular way. It stayed at its standard register of professional attention. "I can run that today," she said. "End of afternoon." "That works," Nora said. "Thank you." She was turning to leave when Sandra said, "Leonard Pruitt. Is that connected to what they found at the Ashby place?" Nora turned back. "The investigation is ongoing." Sandra nodded once. The nod of someone who understands that this is the answer they are going to get and finds it acceptable. "He used to come in regularly," Sandra said. "Filed a great deal of paperwork. Very organized. I always thought he was the kind of man who kept copies of everything." She said it in the neutral tone of a professional observation. "Most careful people do," Nora said. She drove from the clerk's office to the harbor. Owen Strom was at the Ashby property when she arrived. He was standing in the driveway, talking on his phone, and he ended the call when he saw her pull in, which was a thing some people did because they were courteous, and some people did for other reasons. He was mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with the particular weathered look of someone who works outdoors in variable conditions. He extended his hand. "You are the officer assigned to the site?" he asked. "I am handling the investigation coordination," Nora said. "I have a few questions, if you have a few minutes." "Of course." He said it quickly, a fraction quickly. She asked him the standard questions. When he had first learned about the property, how he had come across the listing, what his renovation plans were. He answered clearly and in reasonable detail. He was a contractor by trade, he explained, which was why he had identified the garden bed as an early clearing priority rather than a late one. The listing document had described it as a potential feature, and he had wanted to assess it before committing to a floor plan for the south face of the house. "The listing document," Nora said. "Where did you receive that?" "It came with the auction packet," Owen said. "The estate sale documents, standard package. Do you still have it?" "Everything is at the hotel. We are staying in Camden until the property is livable." He paused. "I can send it through." "I would appreciate that," Nora said. She noted his answers. She noted the way he had shifted his weight when she mentioned the listing document, which could mean several things and probably meant one specific thing that she filed away for later. She thanked him and drove back toward town. Her phone rang as she was crossing the harbor bridge, an unfamiliar number with a Bangor area code. "Officer Callahan?" The voice was a woman's, controlled but tight underneath. "My name is Diane Pruitt Alcott. I understand you are the officer handling the investigation into my brother's death." Nora pulled over. "I am one of the officers involved, yes," she said. "Ms. Pruitt Alcott, I was going to contact you today." "When did you hear?" "This morning, a journalist called me." A pause. "Not the way I would have chosen." "I am sorry for that," Nora said, and meant it. Diane Pruitt Alcott was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had moved from tight to something more carefully arranged. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I did not tell the original investigators 5 years ago. Because at the time, I had no reason to think it mattered." Nora waited. "I drove to Harrow Cove that March," Diane said. "The March he went missing. I was there for 2 days. I went to see Leonard directly." "What was the purpose of your visit?" A longer pause this time. "He had changed his will," Diane said. "Removed me as beneficiary entirely. I found out from someone who had been at a town event and overheard a conversation they should not have been part of. I drove up because I wanted to hear it from him directly." She stopped. "I did see him. We argued. It was not pleasant. And then I drove back to Bangor, and 2 weeks later, the police called me to say his truck had been found in Rockland." "Were you in contact with him after your visit?" "No." "Did anyone in Harrow Cove see you during your time there?" A brief silence. "I believe so. I was not trying to be invisible. I did not think I had anything to hide." Another pause. "I did not kill my brother, Officer Callahan. I was angry with him. I had been angry with him for years, but I did not kill him." Nora looked out at the harbor. The water was flat and gray, and 2 fishing boats were coming in slow and steady from the east. "I would like to speak with you in person," Nora said. "When would you be available?" They arranged a time and ended the call. Nora sat for a moment with the engine running. 3 people with reasons to have been at that property or to have wanted Leonard Pruitt to disappear. The new owner, who behaved as though he had something to protect. The estranged sister, who had driven 2 hours to have an argument and said nothing about it for 5 years. And somewhere in the county records, a probate dispute that had lasted 4 years longer than it needed to, filed by a man who did not want that property to sell. She drove back to the station. Cole was at his desk when she came in. He looked up. "Diane Pruitt Alcott called me," Nora said. "She was in Harrow Cove the March Pruitt disappeared. She saw him. She did not disclose this to the original investigators." Cole set his pen down. "She coming in day after tomorrow. Bar Harbor." He nodded slowly. "And Strom. Something in his file he does not want looked at," Nora said. "Not sure what yet. He is sending the auction listing document over." Cole looked at her for a moment with the expression he used when he had decided not to say something and was making sure the decision held. "Good," he said, and picked up his pen. She went back to her desk and started building the timeline. Chapter 4. The listing document. The document arrived by email at 8:15 the following morning, forwarded from Owen Strom's phone with a subject line that said only, "Attached, as requested." Nora opened it on her station computer. It was a property listing sheet, the kind that real estate brokers produced for their own reference rather than for public circulation. Single page, typed, with a property address header and a series of field notes below. The formatting was orderly and consistent, which was consistent with everything else she had learned about Leonard Pruitt. She read through it twice. The south-facing raised kitchen garden was described in the 3rd field note. Mature railway timber border, established perennial bed. Feature worth preservation, assessment prior to renovation. The note was specific. It told a buyer exactly what was there and exactly what to consider doing about it. She sat with that for a moment. Leonard Pruitt had written a description of his own grave and filed it with the property management records. He had not known that. He had simply been doing his job carefully, which was what he always did. And which was, she thought, a particular kind of cruelty that the situation contained without anyone intending it. She printed the document and added it to the file. Then she pulled up the county land records database and navigated to the Ashby parcel history. The property had transferred twice in the past 15 years. Once to Margaret Ashby from her late husband's estate, which was a straightforward inheritance transfer. Once from Margaret Ashby's estate to Owen and Carla Strom through the auction 8 months ago. Between those 2 transfers, the probate dispute, filed on behalf of one Franklin Ashby of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The first objection had arrived within 2 weeks of Margaret Ashby's death 6 years ago. 3 more had followed over the next 4 years, each one procedural, each one citing a different administrative irregularity in the estate filing. Nora pulled the objection documents. They were competent filings, which meant Frank Ashby had paid for a competent attorney, which meant the delay had been deliberate and resourced. 4 years of deliberate delay. That was not a man protecting an inheritance claim. A man protecting an inheritance claim settles or loses within 18 months. She noted that and moved on. Cole came in at 9 and she briefed him on the listing document. He looked at the printed page for a long moment. Pruitt wrote it himself, he said. In the standard course of property management, Nora said. The document was in the listing archive. When the estate sold the property at auction, it went into the sale packet. Strom received it with everything else. Cole set the page down. So Strom did not know anything about the body. He knew exactly what the garden bed looked like and where it was, Nora said. He did not know what was under it. The listing document is the reason he targeted the garden bed early in the clearing sequence, which is the reason the body was found now rather than 3 years from now when they got around to it. Cole made the sound he made when something was both logical and deeply inconvenient. What is Strom hiding? He said. I do not know yet, Nora said. But it is specific, and he is frightened of it being found. That is not the behavior of someone connected to a 5-year-old murder. It is the behavior of someone with a separate problem who suddenly has police on his property. Cole nodded once. Keep it in the file. Do not pursue it until we know what it is. She drove to the records office at the county courthouse at 11 and requested the full survey log for the Ashby parcel. The clerk took 15 minutes to locate it and another 10 to produce a certified copy, which Nora read standing at the counter. The 2018 survey of adjacent parcels had included a boundary confirmation for the Ashby northeast corner. The iron survey pin was logged as present and in position. A surveyor's initials in the margin. Date confirmed. She took the copy and drove back to Harrow Cove. At the Ashby property, she walked the northeast corner again. The orange flag marker was still there. The wire stake was still there. The iron pin was still gone. She crouched and looked at the socket hole in the ground. The pin would have been 40 centimeters long and perhaps 2 centimeters in diameter. She thought about what a person could do with a 40-centimeter iron rod if they needed a weapon and did not want to bring one with them to a meeting they had arranged. She thought about the medical examiner's report. Single strike, blunt force, posterior skull. A person who did not see it coming. A person who was crouching over the rotted railway timber border, examining it, perhaps at the request of whoever had suggested they meet here. The ground in March would have been soft from the thaw. She stood up and walked back to her car. At the station, she added the survey log to the file and updated the timeline. March. 5 years ago. A narrow 2-week window. Leonard Pruitt alive and meeting someone at the Ashby property. Leonard Pruitt dead and buried under the garden bed. His truck appearing at the Rockland Ferry landing sometime in the same window. 2 things that required 2 separate trips. She wrote that down. The truck did not drive itself to Rockland. Someone drove it there after the murder and left it in the long-term lot and got back to Harrow Cove some other way. 40 kilometers each way. An hour of driving, perhaps more. Someone who could leave Harrow Cove for 2 to 3 hours on a Saturday morning in March without it being noticed or commented on. She was still sitting with that when Sandra Okafor called at 4:15. The property transfer records you requested are ready, Sandra said. All 11 parcels. I can have them at the counter whenever you come by. I will be there shortly, Nora said. She drove to the town clerk's office. Sandra handed over a folder at the counter without ceremony. Everything was tabbed and organized, each parcel's documents in order. The whole thing cross-referenced with a cover sheet in Sandra's own handwriting that listed parcel numbers, transfer dates, and filing status. Nora thanked her. Sandra was already turning back to her desk. At the station, Nora went through the 11 parcels one by one. 10 of them were straightforward sales, management agreements, standard transfers, all correctly filed, all current. The 11th was different. It was a parcel on the north side of town, a small commercial lot that had changed hands 9 years ago. The transfer had gone through the town clerk's office in the standard way, the filing fee paid, the paperwork complete. Except the filing fee on the transfer document was $30 lower than the standard rate for a commercial parcel of that size. She looked at the rate schedule on the county website. The surcharge for commercial property transfers above a certain assessed value had been in place for 14 years. It was a small fee, a processing surcharge, not the kind of thing most people would notice or question. She looked at the document again. The fee line showed the base rate. No surcharge. She went back to the cover sheet Sandra had prepared and pulled 2 more parcels from the folder. She checked the transfer dates and the fee amounts against the county rate schedule. One of them was short by $30. She sat very still for a moment. Then she closed the folder and looked at the wall. She thought about a man who was meticulous and organized and kept copies of everything. She thought about a man who filed 3 title searches in 2 months and who would have noticed, in the course of his work, a discrepancy in a processing fee. She thought about what a careful man would do if he noticed the same discrepancy more than once. She thought about what someone would do if a careful man told them what he had found. She picked up her phone and put it down again. She was not ready to say it out loud yet. She wanted to be certain. She needed more than 2 data points and a theory. She took the folder home and spent the evening cross-referencing every commercial property transfer in the town clerk's database, going back 14 years, against the county rate schedule. Working from the public records portal on her laptop at the kitchen table, she found 23 transfers with the same $30 shortfall, spread across 11 years, regular, consistent, $60,000, roughly, if the pattern held the same across the years. She could not access from the public portal. She closed her laptop and looked at the kitchen wall for a long time. Then she called Cole. "I need access to the town clerk's full transaction records," she said. "Internal database, not the public portal. I need a subpoena or a formal records request through the selectman's office." A pause. "What are you looking at?" Cole said. "I need to be certain before I say it," she said. "But I need those records." Another pause, longer this time. "I will have the request filed by tomorrow morning," Cole said. She thanked him and ended the call. Outside the kitchen window, the March dark was complete, and the temperature had dropped again, and somewhere in the pine tree line at the edge of Ed's property, something moved briefly and was still. She sat at the table and did not sleep for a long time. Chapter 5. Diane. Bar Harbor in early March was a town that had not yet decided to be awake. The summer restaurants were shuttered, the seasonal shops dark behind their pulled gates, the streets quiet in the way that resort towns are quiet out of season, which is a different kind of quiet from a working town, more absence than peace. The Alcott Inn was on a side street 2 blocks from the waterfront, a converted Victorian with a sign that needed repainting and window boxes that would be full of something in June and were empty now. Nora parked on the street and went in. Diane Pruitt Alcott met her in the front sitting room. She was a small woman, mid-50s, with the contained posture of someone who had been managing difficult situations for a long time and had gotten competent at it. She poured coffee without asking and sat across from Nora in a chair that suggested she had chosen it deliberately, the one with its back to the window and a clear view of the door. "Thank you for coming here," Diane said. "I could not leave the inn. We are between staff at the moment." "It is not a difficulty," Nora said. She took out her notebook. Diane's eyes went to it and stayed there for a moment, and then moved away. "Tell me about your visit to Harrow Cove," Nora said. "Start from the beginning." Diane wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I found out about the will change in January," she said. "A woman I had known years ago, Someone who had worked as a paralegal for the attorney handling Leonard's estate documents mentioned it at a mutual friend's gathering. She should not have said it. She knew it as soon as she said it. But she had had a few glasses of wine, and there it was. "How did you react?" "Badly," Diane said, without embarrassment. Leonard and I had not spoken in 3 years at that point, not since our grandfather's funeral. We were not close. We had not been close since we were children, and even then it was more proximity than affection. She looked at the window behind Nora's head. But the will was the will. I had assumed I was in it. Finding out I had been removed without any conversation felt like one more thing Leonard had decided without consulting me. "So you drove to Harrow Cove." "I drove to Harrow Cove. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and I went directly to his office on Harbor Street. He was there. He was not surprised to see me, which told me the paralegal had warned him." She paused. "We argued for about 40 minutes. He told me the decision was final. I told him several things I should not have said, and several things I believe were entirely fair. And then I left." "Where did you stay that night?" "The Anchor Inn, on the harbor. I checked in under my name. I paid by card." She looked at Nora steadily. "I was not hiding." "Did you see Leonard again after that Thursday?" "No, I drove back to Bangor the following morning." Nora wrote that down. "You said you believed someone in Harrow Cove saw you during your visit." "I was seen at his office. The door to the outer room was open, and one of the neighboring businesses had a shared hallway. Someone was in that hallway when I left." She paused. I did not look back to see who it was. "Can you describe the hallway?" "Which floor? Which building?" "Second floor. The Harbor Street building with the green awning." Leonard's office was the second door on the left from the stairwell. Nora wrote it down. She knew the building. She knew which businesses shared that floor. She would check. "The will," Nora said. "Did Leonard tell you who the beneficiary was? If not, you." Diane's expression moved through something brief and complicated. "A land conservation charity," she said. He had become interested in it in his last years. Something about preserving the coastal parcels from development. A pause. It was very Leonard. He cared more about land records than people. She said it without cruelty, just with the flat accuracy of a woman who had known her brother a long time. "Was there anything else that came up during your argument?" Nora said. "Anything beyond the will itself?" Diane was quiet for a moment. "He said something," she said slowly. "Toward the end, when I was pressing him about why he had not told me himself, he said he had enough to think about, that he had discovered something recently that was going to require him to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone, and that he did not have room for another one." She stopped. "I assumed he meant a client, a business matter. I was too angry to ask." Nora looked at her notebook. "Did he say anything more specific than that?" "No, I did not let him. I told him I hoped his uncomfortable conversation went very well for him, and I left." She set her coffee cup down. "I have thought about that moment a great deal in the past 2 days." They sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty inn. "Miss Pruitt Alcott," Nora said, "did Leonard have any enemies that you were aware of? Anyone with a serious grievance against him?" Diane considered it. "Leonard made people uncomfortable," she said. "He knew things about property in that town that other people did not know he knew. He was discreet about it, but he was attentive. The kind of man who noticed discrepancies." She looked at her hands. "I always thought that was the sort of quality that was useful in his profession, and probably exhausting in every other context." Nora wrote "noticed discrepancies." She already knew that. She had known it since the night before. But hearing it from Diane made the shape of it more solid. "One more question," Nora said. "The name Frank Ashby. Did Leonard ever mention him?" Diane thought for a moment. "The Ashby cousins. The probate dispute. Leonard managed a neighboring property at one point. I do not think he knew Frank Ashby personally. She paused. Why? Background only. Nora said. She closed her notebook and thanked Diane for her time and stood to leave. Diane walked her to the door. At the threshold, she stopped. He was not a warm person, Diane said. Leonard, he was not easy to know, and he did not try to be. But he was honest. He was genuinely, completely honest. And he expected other people to be, and was always surprised when they were not. She looked out at the quiet street. I think that is what got him killed. I think he told someone the truth and expected them to receive it the way an honest person would. Nora stood on the step in the cold March air. That is a reasonable thing to think, she said. She drove back to Harrow Cove. On the highway, the pine forest ran along both sides of the road in an unbroken wall, and the sky above it was the flat white of a day that had never quite brightened. She drove and thought about a man who noticed discrepancies and told the truth and gave someone 2 weeks as a courtesy and did not understand what that 2 weeks might be used for. She thought about what it meant that he had arranged to meet someone at a vacant property on a Saturday morning in March. He had trusted whoever he was meeting. He had not been worried about going. He had walked to the raised garden bed and crouched to look at the rotted timber, and he had not heard the person come up behind him. You do not turn your back on someone you are afraid of. She pulled into Harrow Cove at 2:30 and drove directly to the station. Cole was on the phone. He held up one finger and finished his call and put the receiver down. Selectman's office approved the records request, he said. The town clerk's transaction database goes to the county auditor's office by end of week. Full access. Good, Nora said. Cole looked at her. You want to tell me what you are looking for? She sat down across from his desk. I think Leonard Pruitt found something in the town clerk's records in the course of a routine title search, she said. Something systematic and ongoing. I think he told the person responsible what he had found and gave them time to address it. And I think that person used that time to arrange a meeting at a vacant property and make sure Leonard could not report it. Cole was very still. The town clerk's records, he said. Yes? He was quiet for a long moment. You are saying someone in that office, he said. I am saying the records request will confirm or rule it out. Nora said, I am not saying anything beyond that until I have the full database. Cole looked at the middle distance for a moment, the look of a man doing the arithmetic of what this meant for the department and the town and the next several weeks of his professional life. Then he nodded. End of week, he said. Nora drove to Ed's house. He was in the kitchen, reading. Biscuit was under the table. The house smelled of tea and the particular settled warmth of a place where someone has been reading quietly for several hours. She sat down and told him about Diane. Ed listened without interrupting, which was what he always did. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She said he expected honesty from other people, Ed said, and was always surprised when he did not get it. Nora said. Ed turned a page of his book and then set it face down on the table. A man who gives someone 2 weeks, he said, is a man who believes the situation can be resolved without damage to either party. He is not thinking about his own safety. He is thinking about giving the other person a chance. Yes, Nora said. That tells you something about how the other person presented themselves to him. Ed said, not as a threat, as someone he felt some consideration for. Nora looked at the table. Someone Leonard felt consideration for. Someone he was willing to give 2 weeks to and meet privately and turn his back on. Not a stranger. Someone he knew well enough to extend that particular kind of courtesy to. She stayed for supper and drove home in the dark. Chapter 6. What the Records Show. The county auditor's office sent the transaction database extract on Friday morning at 8:53. Nora had been at her desk since 7:30. The file was large. She opened it and spent the first 20 minutes understanding its structure before she touched the data itself, which was a habit she had developed from reading case files and which had saved her from wrong conclusions more than once. The database recorded every transaction processed through the town clerk's office going back 19 years. Each entry had a transaction date, a parcel identifier, a transaction type, a fee amount, and an operator code, a 2 to 4 character string identifying which clerk had processed the filing. There were 6 operator codes in the system. She sorted by operator code and looked at the distribution. 4 of the codes were sparse, occasional, the kind of volume that suggested part-time or relief staff. 1 code was heavy and consistent across all 19 years. 1 code was moderate for the first 3 years, and then very heavy from year 4 onward. The heavy, consistent code was S.OK. She looked at that for a moment. Then she filtered the dataset to SOK transactions only and sorted by fee amount against the rate schedule she had already built from the county records portal. She had written a simple comparison by hand the night before. Fee categories against assessed value thresholds, and she worked through it column by column. The first shortfall appeared in a transaction from 11 years ago, a commercial property transfer, assessed value in the upper bracket, fee recorded at the base rate with no processing surcharge applied. The surcharge for that bracket was $30. She moved to the next and the next. By 11 o'clock, she had identified 41 transactions with the same shortfall, all processed under the S.OK operator code, spread across 11 years at a rate of 3 to 5 per year, never clustered, never consecutive, distributed across different parcel types and different areas of town, varied enough that a routine audit would not catch the pattern without specifically looking for it. Total shortfall across 41 transactions, $1,230 in uncollected fees. She sat back. That was not $60,000. That was not even close to $60,000. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she understood. The shortfall in the town records was the visible end of it, the place where the fee left the payer's hand. The fee was not going into the municipal account. It was being redirected, which meant there was a second account somewhere, an escrow or a holding account, or a personal account, receiving $30 at a time across 11 years and 41 transactions. She needed the bank records. She wrote up the analysis in a clean document, labeled each transaction, and printed it. She took it to Cole's office. Cole read it without speaking. He read it twice. "You are sure about the operator code," he said. "SOK is the code assigned to Sandra Okafor." Nora said, "The assignment log is in the database header. The code has been in use continuously since she took the position." Cole set the document down and looked at the wall. "The shortfall in the municipal records is the mechanism," Nora said. "The actual accumulation is elsewhere. We need a subpoena for her personal financial records to establish the receiving account." "That requires the district attorney's office," Cole said. "Yes." He was quiet. "This is what Pruitt found," he said. It was not a question. "He was doing a title search," Nora said. "He would have pulled the full transfer history for the parcel. He would have checked the fees against the rate schedule as a matter of professional habit. And he was meticulous. He would have noticed a $30 discrepancy, and he would have gone back and checked others." Cole looked at the printed document again. "He told her." Cole said, "He gave her 2 weeks," Nora said. His sister heard him say he had discovered something that required an uncomfortable conversation with someone. That was approximately 10 days before he was reported missing. The office was very quiet. Cole picked up his phone and called the district attorney's office. Nora went back to her desk. She pulled up the Harbor Street property records for the building where Leonard Pruitt had maintained his second-floor office. 2 other businesses shared the floor, a bookkeeping firm on one side and a small insurance brokerage on the other. She called both. The bookkeeping firm had changed ownership 4 years ago, and no one currently employed there had been present 5 years ago. The insurance brokerage had not changed ownership. The woman who answered was the owner. She had been in that office for 12 years. Nora asked her about the Thursday in question. A Thursday in March, 5 years ago. Whether she recalled hearing anything from the neighboring office. Whether she had been in the shared hallway that afternoon. A long pause. "I remember a woman leaving his office," the owner said slowly. "I was coming up the stairs as she was coming out. We nearly ran into each other. She was upset. Not crying, just upset. The way someone is when they are holding something tightly." "Can you describe her?" "Smaller than me. Older than she seemed at first. Dark coat. She did not look at me. She went straight past and down the stairs." That matched Diane Pruitt Alcott's description of herself. "Did you see anyone else go into or out of that office that day?" Nora asked. Another pause. Longer. "Later," the owner said. "After 5. I was locking up. Someone was coming out of his office as I was pulling my door closed. I thought it was late for a client meeting." Nora held her pen still. "Can you describe that person?" "I did not see their face. They had their back to me, going toward the stairs. A woman, professional looking. She had a folder under her arm." A pause. "I remember thinking it was a lot of paperwork for the end of a Friday afternoon. Height build, medium height, compact. That is all I can give you." Nora thanked her and ended the call. She sat at her desk and looked at her notes. Someone had visited Leonard Pruitt's office on the Friday before he went missing. The week after his conversation with his sister. The week after he had told his sister he had an uncomfortable conversation ahead of him. Someone compact and professional looking with a folder of paperwork. The database was still open on her screen. She looked at the SOK operator code at the top of the filtered list. She thought about a woman who had worked in the same building for 20 years and knew exactly how property records worked and knew exactly what a $30 discrepancy in a fee schedule meant if someone who understood the system started looking at it carefully. She thought about a woman who was efficient and calm, and who everyone in town said you could ask for any document going back 20 years and she would have it in her hands before you finished the sentence. She closed the database and went to get another coffee. At 4 o'clock, Cole came to her desk. "The district attorney filed the financial subpoena this afternoon," he said. "We will have the bank records by early next week." "Good," Nora said. "Reyes also called," Cole said. "The soil analysis came back on the iron oxide deposit. Ferrous metal, cylindrical, 2-centimeter diameter, 38-centimeter length. Consistent with a standard survey boundary stake." He paused. "It was in the ground at the time of burial, not placed after." Nora looked at him. "It went in with the body," she said. "Or under it," Cole said. "Reyes says the deposit is below the level of the remains. The object would have been in the soil first." She thought about a survey stake pulled from the northeast corner of the property. Brought to the meeting place in advance, used and buried in the same motion. The shovel going in, the stake going under, the soil going back, the railway timber reset on top. Prepared, she thought. Not a panic, a plan. Cole went back to his office. Nora put on her coat and drove to Ed's house. He was at the kitchen table with a pot of tea and a road map of the Maine coast spread open in front of him, which was one of his habits she had stopped questioning years ago. Biscuit raised his head and went back to sleep. She sat down and told him what the database had shown. She told him about the insurance broker statement. She told him about the survey stake. Ed listened. He folded the map along its original creases while she talked, which meant he was listening carefully, because he only did things with his hands when he was concentrating on something else entirely. When she finished, he poured her tea. "The folder," he said. "The folder." The insurance broker saw someone leaving Pruitt's office with a folder. He set the teapot down. After 5 on a Friday, the week before he went missing. Nora looked at her cup. She went to see what he had. Nora said slowly, to understand how much he knew, whether he had already made copies. Or, Ed said, to give him the impression that she intended to cooperate. Nora was quiet. "He let her into his office on a Friday afternoon," she said. "He was not afraid of her. He thought they were going to work something out." Ed looked at the folded map. "He gave her 2 weeks," he said, "and she used the first week to find out what he had, and the second week to decide what to do about it." The kitchen was very warm. Outside the window, the March dark had come early again, the way it still did even with the days lengthening, a reminder that the season was not yet done with winter. Nora wrapped her hands around her cup. "The bank records come early next week," she said. Ed nodded once. "Then you will know," he said. She stayed for supper and did not say much, and Ed did not ask her to. Chapter 7. The Mud Season Yard. The weekend passed slowly. Nora filed her notes, updated the timeline, and waited for the bank records. Waiting was the part of investigative work that no one described accurately. She had found it was not dramatic tension. It was ordinary time with a question sitting in it that could not yet be answered. She ran on Saturday morning, out past the harbor, and up the hill road that overlooked the water. The sea was gray-green, and the fishing boats were moving in the distance, small and deliberate against the flat horizon. The air smelled of salt and cold mud, and the particular freshness of a season that was not quite ready to commit. She thought about the folder under the arm of a compact professional woman leaving a second-floor office on a Friday afternoon. She thought about a man who expected honesty and did not understand what the 2 weeks he had given someone might be used for. She ran until the thinking stopped being useful, and then she turned back. On Sunday, she drove out to the Ashby property alone and stood at the edge of the cordon site for a while. The excavated section of the garden bed was covered with a forensic tent now, a blue and gray structure that looked wrong against the farmhouse and the pine tree line. The railway timber sections lay where the forensic team had left them, dark and heavy on the pale mud-season ground. She looked at the south face of the house for a long time. Then she drove to Ed's. He was on the back porch when she arrived, sitting in the wooden chair he kept there year-round, and which had weathered to the color of old driftwood. He had a cup of something hot, and Biscuit was in the yard, nosing at the ground where the frost had softened. Nora sat on the porch step. The yard was the particular color of early March, the dead grass matted flat from months of snow, the soil showing through in dark patches where the thaw had gone deeper. Ed's cold-weather garden bed along the south fence was turned and waiting. The bare branches of the apple tree at the far corner made a gray lattice against the white sky. Biscuit moved slowly across the yard with his nose down, following something only he could detect, pausing every few feet with the patience of an animal that has all the time there is. "He smells the spring coming up," Ed said. "He does this every year around now, 2 weeks before anyone else notices anything." Nora watched the dog. "The bank records come tomorrow, or Tuesday," she said. "Yes," Ed said. She pulled her knees up and set her chin on them, which was something she had done on this same step since she was a child, and which she was aware looked undignified in a police uniform, but which she did anyway. "Someone trusted a garden to keep a secret for them," she said. "For 5 years. Ed drank from his cup. "It is not so different from trusting anything else," he said. "A garden, a filing system, a version of events." He paused. "People trust the things that have not failed them yet." Biscuit stopped at the far edge of the yard and looked back at them, and then went back to his investigation. She was right that it would hold. Nora said. If the new owners had not targeted the garden bed early, it might have held another 5 years. She could not have anticipated the listing document, Ed said. No, she could not have known Pruitt had written a detailed field note about that specific garden bed. She could not have known the note would go into the auction packet. Nora looked at the yard. He did it to himself, in a way, his own thoroughness. Ed was quiet for a moment. Do not say it like that, he said. The words were mild, and the tone was mild, but the sentence landed with weight. She looked at him. He was doing his job, Ed said. The same way he always did. Someone else made a choice. That choice has a person attached to it, and it is not him. Nora looked back at the yard. You are right, she said. I am sorry. Do not apologize to me. Biscuit came back across the yard and climbed the 2 porch steps and settled against Ed's leg with the completeness of a dog who has finished what he was doing and is now done. Ed put his hand on the dog's back. They sat for a while without speaking. The cold was present, but not sharp. The kind of temperature that reminds you it is still there without insisting on it. A bird moved in the apple tree and was gone. Cole is going to want to move quickly once the bank records confirm it. Nora said, Yes, Ed said. He will. There is still the Rockland trip, she said. She told her husband she had car trouble. He drove to Rockland and picked her up. He does not know what she was doing. He has never known. Ed looked at the yard. That is a long time to not know something, he said. He is not involved. He just drove to Rockland and brought his wife home because she called him from a payphone and said she needed a ride. Nora paused. He probably thought nothing of it then and has thought nothing of it since. Until someone asks him about it. Ed said, Until someone asks him about it. The porch was quiet. Somewhere past the pine tree line, a woodpecker was working at something. The sound coming in short bursts, and then stopping, and then starting again. Nora thought about the payphone record she had found in the carrier toll log. A Rockland originating call to the Okafor home landline on the morning in question. It had been in the missing persons file for 5 years, unexamined, because there had been no murder investigation to make it worth examining. She had found it by reading the file herself, rather than relying on Cole's summary. She thought about what it meant that the call was to the home landline, not to a cell phone, a landline, which meant the husband had been home that Saturday morning when his wife called from Rockland. He would remember the call. People remembered unusual calls. A wife calling from an unfamiliar number, saying she had car trouble, asking him to make an 80-kilometer round trip to bring her home. That was the kind of Saturday morning a person remembered. She would need to speak with him carefully, not to trap him. He had done nothing wrong. But his memory of that morning was the last piece of the timeline, the confirmation that put Sandra Okafor in Rockland on the same morning Leonard Pruitt's truck appeared in the ferry landing long-term lot. I keep thinking about the knot, Nora said. Ed looked at her. On the tarp. The cord repair on the eyelet. I keep feeling like I know what it is and cannot quite place it. Ed was quiet. What does it remind you of? He said. Something precise, something habitual. The kind of knot a person ties because their hands know it. She paused. Not a marine knot, not construction, something else. Ed said nothing. Biscuit shifted against his leg and settled again. After a while, Nora stood up and brushed off the back of her uniform and said she should get home. Ed said he would have the lamb stew in the freezer if she needed it this week. She said she probably would. She drove home in the last of the Sunday light, the sky going from white to pale gold over the water before the cloud cover took it back again. She slept better than she expected to. Monday morning, Cole called at 8:15. Bank records are in, he said. Come to the station. She was there in 11 minutes. Cole had the records spread across his desk. He had been reading them for a while by the look of it. He was the color of someone who has confirmed something he was hoping not to confirm. 11 years, he said. Personal escrow account in her name at a Portland bank. First deposit 11 years ago. Last deposit 14 months ago. 14 months ago, Nora said. The deposit pattern stops abruptly, Cole said, about the time the Ashby property probate dispute was resolved and the sale went through. He looked at the records. 61,000 and change, total. Nora sat down. She stopped when she knew the property was going to sell, Nora said. She knew what a sale meant. She stopped the deposits and hoped the rest would hold. Cole looked at her. The Rockland payphone record, she said. I need to speak with her husband. Cole was quiet for a long moment. He was thinking about 30 years without a misconduct complaint and what the next week was going to require of him. Then he nodded. Today, he said, before she knows the records are in. Chapter 8. The Man Who Drove to Rockland. Martin Okafor was a high school biology teacher. He had taught at Harrow Cove Regional for 22 years. He was a tall man, unhurried in his movements, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular patient quality of someone accustomed to explaining things carefully to people who do not yet understand them. He met Nora at the door of the house on Birch Street without surprise. She had called ahead. She had told him only that she needed to speak with him about a routine matter related to the Pruitt investigation and that it would not take long. He led her to the kitchen and offered coffee, and she accepted. The kitchen was warm and orderly, a stack of student papers on the counter, a houseplant on the windowsill that had been tended carefully, a corkboard beside the refrigerator with a calendar and several photographs pinned to it, the kind of accumulated domestic record that builds up in a house over years without anyone deciding to make it. Nora sat across from Martin Okafor and opened her notebook. She had thought carefully about how to begin. Not with the payphone record, not yet. She needed to let him arrive at it himself, let his own memory surface it in the natural order of things, before she showed him what she already knew. Mr. Okafor, she said, I am speaking with a number of people in town who may have had contact with Leonard Pruitt in the weeks before he went missing. This is standard background work as the investigation gets underway. Is that all right? Of course, he said. Did you know Leonard Pruitt personally? Not well. I knew who he was. He managed a rental property that a colleague of mine lived in for a few years. He came to school events occasionally, the kind of civic functions where you see everyone in a small town. We were not friends. Did your wife know him better, given her work in the clerk's office? Martin thought about it. She dealt with his filings, professionally. I do not think they were particularly acquainted beyond that. Nora wrote that down. I want to ask you about a specific day, she said. A Saturday in March, 5 years ago. Do you keep a calendar going back that far? He looked at the corkboard. We keep them. Sandra files the old ones. He paused, almost without her noticing. I would have to look. That is fine, Nora said. Let me describe the day and see if it comes back. It would have been an unusual Saturday morning. You received a call from an unfamiliar number, likely a payphone or a business line. Your wife had been out and needed a ride. Martin Okafor went still. It was not a dramatic stillness. It was the stillness of a man who has been carrying a thing he did not know he was carrying and has just felt its weight shift. Yes, he said. I remember that. Nora kept her voice level. Can you tell me about it? He looked at the table. Sandra had taken the car early that morning, he said. She said she was going to drive out to the county records annex in Thomaston, something about a filing she needed to retrieve in person. He paused. Around 11, she called. The number on the display was one I did not recognize. She said the car had broken down and she needed me to come and get her. Where did she say she was? Rockland. He said it quietly. I drove out to Rockland. She was waiting at a gas station on the south end of town, the one just off the main road. The car was not there, nor did not change her expression. "Where was the car?" she said. She said a tow truck had already taken it to a garage, that it would be ready Monday. He stopped. On Monday, the car was in the driveway. She said the garage had sorted it and a friend had dropped it off. He looked up. I did not ask more about it. It seemed straightforward. Nora wrote in her notebook. The car had not broken down. The car had been parked in the long-term lot at the Rockland ferry landing, and Sandra had walked to the gas station and called home and waited. A tow truck had not come. On Monday, the car had reappeared because Sandra had arranged at some point over the weekend to retrieve it herself, or had it retrieved by someone she trusted. She would need to check the ferry landing lot records and the local garages. She already knew she would not find a repair record. "Mr. Okafor," she said carefully, "did anything about that day seem unusual to you at the time?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The county records annex in Thomaston," he said slowly. "Sandra mentioned it as the reason she went out early, but the annex is in the opposite direction from Rockland." He looked at the table. "I noticed that on the drive home. I thought perhaps I had misheard her, or that she had made a second stop." He had known, on some level, that the directions did not match. He had filed it under misheard and driven home and never taken it back out. Nora closed her notebook part way. "Mr. Okafor," she said, "I need to ask you one more question, and I need you to answer it honestly." He looked at her. His face was the face of a man who already knows the question. "Has your wife seemed concerned or anxious in the past several weeks?" Nora said. "Since the discovery at the Ashby property?" A long silence. "She has not slept well," he said. "She said it was work stress, the investigation creating extra records requests." He paused. "She has been very quiet." Nora nodded once. "Thank you," she said. She stood and put on her coat. "I may need to speak with you again. Please do not discuss this conversation with anyone until you hear from me." He stood. He was very still. "Officer Callahan," he said. She stopped. "What is happening?" he said. The question was quiet and direct. The question of a man who teaches 18-year-olds and knows how to ask something without theatrics. She looked at him for a moment. "I cannot tell you that yet," she said. "I am sorry." She drove back to the station. Cole was at his desk with the bank records and a legal pad covered in notes. He looked up when she came in. "He confirms it," she said. "She told him she was going to Thomaston. She ended up in Rockland. He drove to Rockland and picked her up at a gas station. The car was in the driveway Monday morning with no credible explanation." She sat down. He noticed the directions did not match on the drive home and filed it away. Cole set his pen down. "That is the timeline locked," he said. "Yes." He looked at the legal pad. "Reyes called this morning," he said. "He found something else in the tarp evidence review. A partial boot print in the interior canvas surface, preserved by the soil compression. Women's boot, size 7. Nora thought about Sandra Okafor standing at the counter in the clerk's office, small and compact. A size 7 was consistent. "The district attorney is ready to move," Cole said. "They want to bring her in for questioning tomorrow morning, formal interview, with counsel notified." Nora was quiet. "Before we do," she said, "I want to resolve Frank Ashby." Cole looked at her. "He is not the killer," she said, "but he knows something. He has been protecting something for 4 years through procedural filings. Before we bring Sandra in, I want to understand what he was told and who told him. Because if someone reached out to Frank Ashby in the early days after the murder and told him there had been a problem at the property, that is a thread that connects back to Sandra, and it matters for how the district attorney builds the case." Cole thought about it. "Call him," he said. "Today." She called Frank Ashby at noon. He had a lawyer on the line within 20 minutes of her first question. which was what she had expected. She asked the lawyer if her client would be willing to make a statement voluntarily. Given that the investigation was now a homicide case, and that his conduct in the probate proceedings was directly relevant, the lawyer asked for 30 minutes. Frank Ashby called back in 22, without the lawyer. His voice was the voice of a man who has been waiting for a particular phone call for 4 years and is relieved, in a complicated way, that it has finally come. "Someone called me," he said, "about 3 weeks after Aunt Margaret died. I did not know the person. They said there had been a problem at the property. They said the garden had been dealt with, and I should not rush to sell." He paused. "They said if I let the estate process naturally, without hurrying anything, everything would stay quiet." "Did they threaten you?" "Not directly. It was more that they implied I would not want to know what the problem was, that knowing it would put me in a difficult position." Another pause. "I am not proud of what I did. I hired an attorney, and I filed objections, and I delayed the sale for 4 years. I told myself it was the prudent thing. I did not ask any more questions because I did not want the answers." "Did the person call again?" "Once, 2 years ago, when I filed the 3rd objection. They thanked me. They said they appreciated my patience." His voice was flat. "I did not know there was a body. I want you to understand that. I thought it was something else, something minor. I did not know." Nora believed him. The silence on his end when she had told him, 2 weeks ago, what had been found. 8 full seconds of it. That silence had been honest. "The voice," she said. "Male or female?" A pause. "Female," he said. Quiet. Very controlled. Nora thanked him and ended the call. She sat at her desk for a moment. Then she went to Cole's office and told him what Frank Ashby had said. Cole listened without expression. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Tomorrow morning." Nora said. She drove to Ed's house at the end of the day. He was in the kitchen with the remainder of the lamb stew on the stove, and Biscuit in his usual spot by the wood stove. She sat down and did not say anything for a while. Ed ladled stew into bowls and sat across from her. "Frank Ashby did not know there was a body," she said. "He thought it was something minor. He let himself be managed because not knowing was easier than knowing." Ed broke bread. "People often choose that," he said. "It is not a small thing to be willing to know." Nora looked at her bowl. "Tomorrow," she said. Ed nodded once and said nothing more about it. They ate. Chapter 9. The Only Knot She Knew. The interview room at the station was small and warm, and smelled of the same institutional coffee it always smelled of. Nora had been in it many times on the other side of the table. This was the first time she had sat in on a formal interview from Cole's side. Sandra Okafor arrived at 9 in the morning with an attorney named Pelletier, a careful woman in her 60s from the Ellsworth firm the district attorney's office had seen before. Sandra was dressed as she always was, professional and composed, the reading glasses on their beaded chain, the same contained efficiency she carried into every room. She looked at Nora when she came in. It was a brief look, a fraction of a second. And then she looked at Cole and at her attorney and sat down. Cole ran the interview. He was procedural and unhurried. 30 years of the same quality in every sentence. And Nora understood, watching him, why he had not had a misconduct complaint in 3 decades. He began with the general. Her role at the town clerk's office, her professional relationship with Leonard Pruitt, the nature of property transfer filings and fee schedules. Sandra answered everything clearly and without hesitation. Cole moved to the specific. He placed the bank records on the table. He placed the transaction database extract beside it, each shortfall highlighted, the operator code visible in every row. Sandra looked at the documents. She looked at them for a long time. Pelletier leaned in, and they spoke briefly and quietly. Then Pelletier sat back. Sandra looked at Cole. "I would like to explain," she said. Peltier put her hand on Sandra's arm. Sandra looked at her, and something passed between them, and Peltier took her hand away. The fee discrepancy began 11 years ago, Sandra said. It was not planned initially. A transaction came through where the assessed value was on the boundary between brackets. I applied the lower rate. The difference was $30. She paused. No one questioned it. The following month, a similar transaction came through, and I applied the lower rate again. Her voice was level, the voice of someone who has been carrying a thing for 11 years and has decided, in this room, to set it down. It became a habit, she said. Not every transaction, enough to be invisible. I knew the audit patterns. I knew what a routine review would and would not catch. She looked at the table. I told myself it was a processing interpretation, a bracket judgment call. I told myself that for 11 years. Cole let the silence sit for a moment. Leonard Pruitt, he said. Sandra was very still. He came to the office in February, she said, 5 years ago. He was doing a title search on a commercial parcel, and he had pulled the full transfer history. He showed me the discrepancy in the fee record and asked me if it was a data entry error. She paused. He was not aggressive. He was genuinely asking. He thought it might be a systems issue. What did you tell him? I told him I would look into it. She stopped. He came back a week later. He had found 2 more instances. He told me he felt he needed to bring it to the selectmen's attention, but that he wanted to speak with me first, to give me the opportunity to explain. Another pause. He gave me 2 weeks. Cole said nothing. I went to his office on the Friday of that week, Sandra said. I wanted to see what he had retained, whether he had made copies, whether there was already a paper trail I could not contain. She looked at her hands on the table. He had a file. He showed me the file. He was completely open about it. He trusted that I would receive it the way he intended it, as an opportunity to correct something before it became formal. The room was quiet. I told him I needed the weekend to think, she said. He said he understood. He said he would wait to hear from me before going to the selectmen. She paused. He trusted me. Cole placed a photograph on the table. The northeast corner of the Ashby property, the empty socket where the survey pin had been. Sandra looked at it. I called him on the Friday evening, she said. I told him I had been thinking and that I wanted to discuss a possible arrangement, that I had access to a vacant property where we could speak privately away from the office. A long pause. He agreed. He was not suspicious. He was trying to resolve something cleanly. Cole placed the forensic soil analysis on the table beside the photograph. Sandra, he said, I need you to tell me what happened at the Ashby property on that Saturday morning. Peltier said something quietly. Sandra shook her head once. He was looking at the garden bed, she said, the railway timber border. He was crouching down, examining the rot in the wood, the way he always engaged with property details, thoroughly, attentively. He did not hear me come around the south side of the house. She stopped. I had the survey stake in my hand. I had pulled it from the northeast corner pin when I arrived, before he got there. The room was very still. I did not plan it until that morning, she said. I want to say that I do not know if it makes a difference. I drove out there and I walked the property, and I looked at the garden bed, and I looked at the boundary pin, and I understood that there was a way for the situation to resolve. Her voice did not waver. It was the most frightening thing about the statement. And then I waited for him. Cole let the silence hold for a long moment. Nora was looking at the table. She was thinking about Leonard Pruitt crouching over the rotted railway timber, examining it carefully, the way he engaged with every property detail, thoroughly and attentively, and not hearing the person come around the south side of the house behind him. She was thinking about 2 weeks given as a courtesy and what those 2 weeks had been used for. She was thinking about the knot. Cole moved to the Rockland ferry landing. Sandra confirmed the timeline without being asked to. She had driven Pruitt's truck to Rockland after the burial. She had left it in the long-term lot. She had walked to a gas station and called home from the payphone. Her husband had come and brought her home. He did not know. Cole asked about Frank Ashby. Sandra confirmed that as well. She had called him 3 weeks after the murder from a phone she no longer had. She had told him there had been a problem at the property and that patience was the prudent approach. She had not told him what the problem was. She had trusted that a man who did not want to know would not look. She had been right for 4 years. Cole placed the tarp evidence photograph on the table, the brass eyelets along the hem, the repaired corner eyelet with the nylon cord. "The tarp came from your garage," Cole said. "Yes." "The cord repair on the eyelet." Sandra looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked up, not at Cole, but at Nora. It was a direct look. Curious. Almost. "I tore the eyelet loading the kayak 2 summers before," Sandra said. "I repaired it myself at the campsite that weekend. It was the only knot I trusted to hold." She paused. "A marlinspike variant. My father taught it to me when I was 12. My hands have done it without thinking ever since." Nora looked back at her. She thought about the photograph in the clerk's office, the tent in the rain. The guy lines nodded with the particular precision of hands that had done it so many times they no longer had to think about it. She thought about Ed's kitchen, the wood stove and the lamb stew and the folded map. The only knot you know. She had been looking at it since the first morning at the site. It had been sitting in her notebook for a week, the small, precise loop of nylon cord, and it had taken until now to land where it belonged. Pelletier was speaking to Cole about the formal charging process, and Cole was responding, and the procedural machinery of the thing was moving forward around the table. Nora was still looking at Sandra Okafor. Sandra was looking at her hands. She did not look like a monster. She looked like a woman who had made a choice 11 years ago, and then another choice 5 years ago, and who had carried both of them without anyone seeing. Through town council meetings and counter transactions and professional courtesies and a photograph of a rainy campsite on her office wall. She had been efficient and calm, and she had filed things correctly, and she had been well liked. None of those things had stopped her. Cole ended the interview. Pelletier and Sandra were shown out by the duty officer to wait for the formal charging paperwork. The door closed. Cole sat at the table for a moment without moving. "You knew it was the knot," he said. He was not asking. "Not until she said the words," Nora said. "I had been carrying it for a week without being able to place it. My grandfather said something about knots, and I kept turning it over. It did not land until she looked at the photograph." Cole looked at the table. "Good work," he said. He said it quietly and without ceremony, which was the way he said things he meant. Nora nodded. She gathered her notebook and her pen and stood up. She thought about driving to Ed's house. She thought about the kitchen and the tea and the wood stove. She thought about telling him that the knot had finally landed where it belonged, and watching him receive that with the calm of a man who had been reasonably confident it would. She went back to her desk and wrote up her notes while they were still clean and exact. Outside the station window, the harbor was quiet in the thin March light. A single fishing boat was coming in from the east, slow and steady, the way the boats always came in at the end of a day. The mud season was not finished. There were still cold weeks ahead, gray mornings, the town not quite ready to wake up all the way. But the ground was softening, and the days were getting longer, and the boats were coming back out, and eventually, the way it always did, the season would turn. She wrote until the notes were done. Then she put on her coat and drove to Ed's. Chapter 10. What Stays and What Goes. The charging paperwork took 3 days. The district attorney filed on a Wednesday morning 1 count of murder in the first degree, 1 count of embezzlement of public funds, one count of obstruction in relation to the original missing persons investigation. Pelletier entered a not guilty plea on Sandra Okafor's behalf, and the case was bound over to the Superior Court in Ellsworth. By Thursday morning, it was in the county paper. By Thursday afternoon, everyone in Harrow Cove knew. Nora spent most of Thursday at the station answering calls that Cole was routing to her, which was his way of giving her the work without making a formal announcement about it. Reporters from the county paper and one from Portland. A representative from the selectman's office asking about the process for appointing an interim town clerk. A call from the Maine State Police liaison who had been copied on the district attorney's filing and wanted a case summary. She answered them all clearly and without adding anything beyond what was in the official record. At 4 o'clock, she drove to the harbor. She sat on the dock for a while with the engine off and the window down. The air was cold and smelled of brine and diesel and the particular mix of things that the harbor always smelled of. The same smell it had been her whole life. The smell of a place that continued regardless. A few boats were still out. One was coming in, its running lights already on in the late afternoon gray. She thought about Leonard Pruitt writing field notes about a garden bed. She thought about Frank Ashby filing procedural objections for 4 years because not knowing was easier than knowing. She thought about Martin Okafor driving to Rockland on a Saturday morning because his wife had called from a payphone and said she needed a ride, and he had not asked more about it because it had seemed straightforward. She thought about what it meant to live in a town of 4,000 people where everyone knew everyone's business and still carry something that large for 5 years without anyone seeing it. She drove to Ed's house. He was in the kitchen. The table was set for 2, which meant he had heard the news and had known she would come. Biscuit was in his spot by the wood stove, one ear raised at her arrival and then flat again. She sat down. Ed brought soup and bread and tea and sat across from her. They ate without speaking for a while, which was one of the things she had always valued most about Ed's kitchen, that the silence in it was never uncomfortable, never a gap that needed filling. "Martin Okafor," she said eventually. Ed looked at her. "He did not know," she said. "He drove to Rockland because his wife called and said she needed a ride. He noticed the directions did not match on the drive home. He filed it under misheard." She paused. "He has been living in that house with her for 5 years since." Ed was quiet. "What will happen to him?" he said. "Nothing legally. He has no guilty knowledge. He is a witness in a case where he confirms one piece of the timeline and nothing more." She looked at the table. "What happens to him otherwise is not something the case can speak to." Ed nodded slowly. "And the town," Nora said. "She ran that office for 20 years. She filed things correctly. She was efficient, and she was liked. Those things were all true at the same time as everything else." Ed broke a piece of bread. "Towns survive worse," he said. "They do not survive easily, but they survive." Nora thought about the selectman's representative calling about an interim clerk, the machinery of civic function moving forward because it had to, because there were still property transfers to file and documents to retrieve, and the work did not stop because the person doing it had turned out to be something other than what the town thought she was. "I keep thinking about the courtesy," she said. Ed looked at her. "The 2 weeks. He gave her 2 weeks as a courtesy." She looked at her soup. "He was being decent. He thought she would receive it the way a decent person would." Ed was quiet for a moment. "He was not wrong about what a decent person would do with 2 weeks," Ed said. "He was wrong about what she was." Nora looked at him. "Is that a distinction that matters?" she said. Ed considered it seriously. The way he always considered things, she asked him directly. "To the case, no," he said. "To what we choose to believe about people, yes. Considerably." Biscuit shifted by the wood stove and settled again with a long exhale. Outside the kitchen window, the March dark had come all the way down. The yard was invisible beyond the glass. The apple tree gone. The cold weather garden bed along the south fence gone. Everything reduced to the reflection of the warm kitchen in the dark window. "I found the knot," Nora said. In the interview, she looked at the photograph and said her father had taught it to her when she was 12, that her hands had done it without thinking ever since. She paused. The only knot she knew. Ed looked at her with the steady attention he gave to things that mattered. "You carried it for a week," he said. "I knew it was there. I could not place it." She looked at her hands around the teacup. "You said something about knots, and I kept turning it over, and it did not land until she was sitting across from me in the interview room." Ed said nothing. He did not say he had known she would get there. He did not say he had been confident. He simply nodded once, the nod of a man who had asked the right question and was satisfied to have the answer confirmed. That was enough. Nora finished her soup. She thought about what came next, the superior court process, which would take months, testimony, which she would be asked to give, the bank records and the transaction database, and the survey stake deposit in the soil, all of it assembled into a case that the district attorney would carry forward. Her part in it was done. She had done her job. She had been assigned to documentation support at an excavation site, and she had kept her eyes open, and she had read a file that no one else had read carefully, and she had followed the thread where it went. Cole had said good work. That was enough for that, too. She stood and put on her coat. "Thank you for supper," she said. Ed stood and carried the bowls to the counter. "Next week," he said, "if the weather holds. I'm going to start turning the south bed properly. The cold-framed tomatoes need to go in by the end of April." Nora looked at him. "You want help?" "Saturday," he said. "If you are not working—" "I will check the schedule," she said. He walked her to the door. Biscuit followed them to the hallway and sat, which was his standard farewell, patient and complete. Nora stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her immediately, cleaner than it had been even a week ago, carrying something different underneath it. Not quite warmth, but the memory of warmth, the suggestion that the season knew it could not hold much longer. She stood on the porch for a moment. The pine tree line at the edge of the property was a dark shape against the slightly less dark sky. Somewhere beyond it, the harbor was out there, the boats at their moorings, the water doing what the water did regardless. Leonard Pruitt had written careful field notes about a garden bed, and they had, eventually, in the way that careful work sometimes does, brought the truth up out of the ground. She thought that was the kind of thing he would have appreciated. She got in her car and drove home through the quiet town. The mud season was not over. There were still cold mornings ahead, still gray weeks before the fishing boats came back in numbers, and the tourists arrived to disrupt the social order, and the harbor went loud and bright the way it went every summer. But the ground was soft, and the days were longer, and somewhere in Ed's yard, Biscuit had been nosing at the thawing earth and finding whatever was beginning to come up through it. The season would turn. It always did.